It is a pleasure to be here. I don't think I've spoken here before, but what a beautiful day it is in Melbourne. I've been outside a bit today, down Collins Street and back and forth. Now have an office in the old Treasury building with other dead premiers and dead governors. I'm probably the least dead of them at the moment. Anybody feel a bit warm and hot and sunny? It's the last day of spring today, first day of summer tomorrow, November the 30th. I think we got up to about 30 degrees today. I was just checking in Ankara at the moment. It's 5 degrees heading for 8. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning. It's 5 degrees heading for 8 and the overnight temperature is -3. And that pretty much looks like the temperature for this week in Ankara, which is about the same latitude as the Gallipoli Peninsula, Ankara in Turkey. Which makes me ask the question, can you remember what you were doing 100 years ago? 100 years ago today, at this very moment, John Monash was bunkered down in the Gallipoli Peninsula with all the troops, and they had been enduring what came to be known as the big storm. 3 days of storm, including snow. The peninsula basically froze. And whilst those at home here are probably enjoying weather similar to ours, our troops were pretty much trapped on the peninsula with no shelter. 200 were frozen to death. 4,000 got frostbite. And that started on the 27th, 28th of November.
How many were there altogether?
The 30th of November. That was across the peninsula. Ironically, those at ANZAC suffered the least. But they were all hunkered down. And it's a reminder that nearly 12,500 ANZAC troops never came back. And a very large percentage of them were not killed by enemy fire. They were killed or died as a consequence of illness and other causes. It's hard for us to imagine that now. But I just wanted to put a little context around a conversation about Monash, because he's seen, still, on his horse leading the march down St Kilda Road or Swanston Street or up Spring Street. And he served at the front. Can I acknowledge Patrick and acknowledge the Institute and the important work you do? And can I say up front, in my view, John Monash is the greatest Victorian and the greatest Australian of all time. Yeah. And you've just been watching some footage which I think has just concluded. So don't go with the next one yet. That was some footage which, if you glanced up at, was filmed in Melbourne in 1910, Spencer Films. Titled Marvellous Melbourne. If you want to watch them, all you've got to do is YouTube Marvellous Melbourne. It pops up first. So it's easy to watch, and they're beautiful, beautiful. You'll see strange things. You'll see Spring Street Parliament House and it says Federal Parliament House. And you'll see Government House and it says the Governor General's House. And most Australians forget that for 27 years, Melbourne was the capital of Australia. From 1901 to 1927. All the decisions were made here. Prime Ministers, regardless where they came from, lived here. The Governor General lived here. The Cabinet made the decision to go to war at the corner of Spring Street and Collins Street. The Cabinet room there, now a solicitor's office. This was the centre of Australia, and it was arguably one of the great centres of the world, and had been so for some 60 years, as people came here from all over the world. And those who came here had some abiding qualities. They obviously had to be aspirational. They had to be courageous to cross the world and come here. They had to be ambitious. They had to have a focus on the future and focus on the family. And the predominant characteristic of most of them, and people forget, is that they were young. They were essentially young, and those who weren't young were certainly young at heart. And post the gold rush, post-settlement and the gold rush, 60 years, it was a vector to Melbourne from all over the world. People came here from China, from Japan, from South Africa, from South America, and the works. And when war was declared in Australia, it was actually really the very first opportunity for the young and the young at heart to actually turn around and say, we're going to the world. And they did so with immense enthusiasm. So the purpose of showing you that footage is just to remind you of the world that existed at that time. Melbourne was the capital. Melbourne was the decision-making place. Melbourne was a go-to place in the world. Melbourne was John Monash's home. Melbourne was where all the action was. And if you're wondering why I'm no longer Premier, I haven't spoken about this publicly, but I had proposed that the capital of Australia be relocated to Melbourne. And those Carston fans, they wouldn't let it happen. There's a core character in Victoria as well. Because we're free settled, and because those young people who came here actually did it really well, there's a core character which I describe as the pursuit of excellence. And we have a civic legacy in Victoria which is unlike any civic legacy in any other state. You can see it in our buildings, our cathedrals, our parliament, albeit fueled by gold. The gold could have been spent badly, it was spent brilliantly. And that's engendered this culture that is, I say, the culture of pursuit of excellence, and it distinguishes Victoria and probably makes us, in the eyes of other states, the arrogant place in Australia, which is so been. At every federal conference I've ever been at, in any business, institution or politics, it's always been get the Victorian. Probably because of that culture and that commitment, and I think it's pretty much still with us. John Monash, for me, represents that culture absolutely. A learned individual, somebody who valued family, valued culture, valued education, valued a focus on the future. And it's no surprise, can we see, it's no surprise that in 1918, the King of England saw fit to knight Monash in the field, which hadn't happened for hundreds of years, hadn't happened since, following the Battle of Amiens. And I just wanted to show you this footage. You may or may not have seen it. Most Australians haven't seen it. And it's worth seeing, because this is a ceremony unlike any ceremony you'll see today. I want you to think about it and count the seconds it takes. King George goes to the field, the battlefield, met Monash, come to like Monash, heard what Monash had done, and he made the decision to go there. Monash assembled his troops. The king arrives in his Lamborghini. Quickly inspects the troops, steps up to the villa, pops inside. Monash comes out, and the ceremony takes all of 5 seconds. That's the way to do a ceremony. So you have to understand what this ceremony meant to the military commanders of all the Allied forces in 1918. The king has come to Monash. Monash, who had been through so much. Here's the ceremony. Monash steps up, kneels down, bing, bing, that's it. That's all no speeches, and I think that ought to be the model for ceremonies in the future. And I suspect Monash would probably agree himself. No commander in recent history has been elevated to a greater platform, at least in those metaphoric terms, than Monash. Sadly, not true in other areas. So, 100 years later, 96 years later, who knows anything about Monash? Monash University did a survey of its graduates recently. 80% of them didn't know the university was named after an individual. Those who knew it was named after an individual didn't know who Monash, most of them didn't know who Monash was. And if you stepped out into the streets of Melbourne today and asked young people today what the name Monash means, it means that freeway that's a car park. It's that university you didn't go to. It's the council that gave you a parking ticket. It's all of those things, but it's sadly not Sir John Monash. And Michael Hedbury, who's one of the pioneers at Monash, he did his own survey of 23 graduates recently before they decided to erect a sculpture at Monash, which has now been completed. And just 23 graduates, only 3 knew the university was named after an individual. One was from New South Wales, 2 were from overseas. Yeah. This is a pretty educated audience, with the exception. Invite me back and I'll be nice. There's just a list of organisations named after John Monash. And you could probably do 3 times as many. We just wanted to fill one page. We're going to show you some stuff tonight. We don't expect you to read it all, and I'm going to break every PowerPoint convention by having too much information. There is just too much to know about John Monash. So there's just an array of Monash organisations. There are some of the streets named after Monash, and there's a lot of them. There are many more that could be included there. We've got a big job to re-elevate John Monash.
Is there any other Monash that's worth figuring out?
Well, there was his immediate family, but he was the only Monash who served in the First World War. And of course, he wasn't. His parents had changed their name from Monash to Monash originally. So there aren't many Monashes around, and of course, none left. His descendants carry the name Bennett now. But Monash was much more than a military commander. He was an academic, he was an engineer, an accomplished engineer. Of course, he was a great military general, and we're just going to show you some of the bridges that Monash built. And there are a lot of them. He's a great thinker, a great leader, a great Australian, great leader of the Jewish community. He was a linguist, he was a reader, he was an innovator, he was a committed democrat, a pluralist, a communicator, an egalitarian. And he was also a very accomplished musician. Put it all together and he's a bit of a sort of Teddy Roosevelt kind of character in Australia. But they are certainly different in many other ways. But Monash had an incredible record as an engineer. I won't go through it all, and it wasn't all easy, but he started off working on the Princess Bridge. He was responsible for the Outer Circle railway line. Monia, he got the licence from Monia products in Victoria, and the Monia bridges, and there are many bridges in country Victoria that are there. I'll show you some photographs, just flipping through them. And they were all revolutionary. Anderson Street Bridge at the bottom of St Anderson Street, over here, is a Monash bridge. And not without contention, because all the bridges in those days had to be weight tested. And they literally rolled heavy weights onto the bridges. In some cases, some of those who detested Monash, for various reasons, just kept rolling weights on until the bridges collapsed. And that happened on a couple of occasions, and it posed a massive threat to his professional career. But every single day, everyone in Victoria is touched by John Monash. But I suspect probably only 10 to 15% know who John Monash was. Every day there's a road or a bridge that Victorians go over. Every time you switch on the power, you owe that power to John Monash and his work with the SEC. Every time we enjoy the fruits of a peaceful, quiet Australia, you have to pay tribute to John Monash. Every time you drive past the shrine or walk past the shrine or visit the shrine, it was Monash who made it happen. Monash was a neighbour to many, many people. In fact, it's a bit like the life of Brian. You go through the list and some smart ass will say, yeah, but what did John Monash ever do for us? It's an extraordinary list. That's just a very brief summary list of his military service. Now, we've given you a handout today, and there's a purpose to the handout. And if you're very astute, you'll note that the print is very small. And you'll probably think, what on earth am I giving this out for? That is deliberate. We don't want you to read it, because most of you won't be able to. What we want you to do is to understand the concept we're going to talk about and use this to talk to some young people. And the worst thing that baby boomers do is lecture young people. The best thing that baby boomers can do is to ask young people to provide them, the baby boomers, with some information. If you give them the information, they'll end up on a shelf. If you ask for it, they'll own it, and they think they've got you. And the purpose of this is to direct you. That little bit of information you just saw before came off a website there called the AIF Project, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 down on the front page. And that's revolutionised how we deal with the ANZAC centenary. I'll come to that in a moment. We set ourselves 5 objectives as the ANZAC Centenary Committee. They're pretty obvious, uncontroversial. Firstly, to honour those who serve. Secondly, to educate, because there's a big gap. Thirdly, to pass the torch to the next generation, because there's no use us just entertaining ourselves. And fourth, we want to leave an even richer legacy than we've got. We've got the best records in the world, but we can do so much more, make them more accessible, more searchable, and we're in the process of doing that. And finally, to strengthen our alliances with friends and once enemies, and that is happening as well. And there are ways to do this. Certainly, we say it's not just about ANZAC Day 2015. In fact, I'll be chairman of this committee until February 2020, which is the centenary of the repatriation of the last troops. And nor is it a celebration, it's a commemoration. We're very careful not to use the word celebration. But it's our view, the best thing we can do is encourage young people to find their connection to these events and to these people, and to Monash in particular. And there they all are out at Monash University. Disconnect from the man that the university is named after. We've got to do whatever we can to do that. So how do you connect? Of course you can connect on a family basis. But quick experiment, hands up, who can name both their parents' family names? Put your hands up. Keep them up if you can name all 4 of your grandparents' family names. What about all 8 of your great-grandparents? What about all 16 of your great-grandparents? Zara and Fitz will be giving lectures on how to
Longer than a German, too.
That'll be right. That's why we've got to strengthen these friendships. The point of that is, if you think about your great-grandparents, and you probably feel close to your grandparents, and then put them in the context of your grandchildren if you've got them. For your grandchildren, your grandparents are great-great-grandparents. They're one of the 16 that most of you couldn't remember. Family memory fades over time. And there's nothing bad about it. That's what happens. But in its place, other things occur. Of course, there are multicultural connections. Most Australians don't remember that we had our troops were escorted to Egypt by the Japanese Navy in the First World War. We had Russian original ANZACs, we had Chinese original ANZACs, Chilean original ANZACs, Jewish original ANZACs, Indian original ANZACs, German original ANZACs we did. We had South Africans as well, and we had Indigenous original ANZACs. So there are connections to be made through that as well. And there are occupational connections. We've now arranged, at least for the first 10,000 of Victoria's records to be searchable by occupation, and we're trying to get this done nationally. So we were able to go to Victoria Police and say, what do you know about the police officers who served? Well, they're the ones who died on the honour, but what about those who served? And we were able to give them the list of those who were on the first convoy. They got it, and since then they have been able to put together a lot of material which has embraced the police force involving those who served. Likewise, institutional schools, churches, sporting clubs across the road, the MCC, the hundreds and hundreds of MCC members who served are acknowledged. And likewise, those from country towns in Victoria, it's not a country town that doesn't have a memorial in it. But think about this, what about the homes of those who served? Some of you will live in homes that are 100 years old. You probably never thought about who was staring out the bedroom window 100 years ago. But last year, before I left Parliament, I was able to write to 1,000 of my constituents, all of whom occupied the homes of those once, occupied the homes of those constituents as original ANZACs. Massive response. And we're now, the government's just signed off on a program to allow people in their homes to acknowledge that with some plaques and stuff. So you tell a young kid that they're sharing the bedroom that was once occupied by original ANZAC. Their whole perspective changes. They pick up the thread of the connection, and suddenly they've got their arms around somebody who might not be family, but the connection is powerful. And Kathy was here with me, lives in Burundara, and she took 3 records across to the Liverpool house across the road where her little kids living, and they were 6 inches taller after she presented with the records, and they went to the school and put their arms around. So there are other ways of making a connection, and that's what we're seeking to do. And we're not the only ones. Winston Churchill said at the end of the war, quite poignantly, he said in 100, 200, 300 years' time, Australians, he was talking about Australia, will look back at these events and these people. And amongst other things, he said, every family will seek to trace some connection. And you can. It might not be your own family member, but it might be somebody who's in your home, in your town, in your church, in a sporting club, with the same multicultural background, even if you come from some other background. So it's possible for all Victorians to make a connection. Now Monash, I'm not going to go through all this, there's just a massive information about Monash. And if you want a good read, Geoffrey Searle wrote a beautiful book about Monash, and Roland Perry's written a beautiful book about Monash as well, and I recommend it. But Tim Fisher's written a more recent book about Monash, but yes, there's others as well. I helped Tim launch his book, so I should have included it, shouldn't I? Simply to make the point that he was born in West Melbourne, just north of Flagstaff, goes in 58 Dudley Street in West Melbourne, goes down to Festival Hall, and ended up at Scotch College. He didn't do so well at first, but then he became the Ducks. And early on he made a decision to get involved in the military. He joined the University Battalion in 1884 and North Melbourne Battery, and he struggled through university, he got through eventually. He was a bit distracted. He might have had an interest in some other things that were happening at university or some other people. He was probably an early devotee of OWEC. Post-university, of course, he got involved, he set up his engineering practice, the Outer Circle Railway, the bridge work started, he got married, he had an interesting relationship with a number of people. For those who don't know, Monash, when he started the Outer Circle Railway, he moved into a home in the area of St Kew, with effectively his chief of operations, and ended up having a long and loving relationship with the wife of his chief of operations in the home, so it became a bit tricky. And then he, and we just marked in red some of the steps that he took to pick up military training, and he actually made a decision that he was going to pursue a military career and an engineering career, but perhaps in the other order. And of course then, after 1908, he got more seriously involved, And again, most Australians wouldn't know or perhaps remember that in 1910, 1911, Kitchener came out as with the responsibility for all the Empire's forces. He came out and oversaw 1910 Monash's military manoeuvres in Seymour and Avenel. 10,000 uniformed volunteers in the Seymour and Avenel region, and Kitchener up on the hill watching it all. And that's where Kitchener and Monash first met. And that's the equivalent of around 60 or 70,000 uniformed troops marching into Seymour now. You can imagine what impact that would have now. It had a huge impact then, and obviously had an impact on Kitchener. And even in 1914, in February 1914, another military exercise in Lilydale and Coldstream with some, I think, 3,000 troops, 3,000 uniformed, at this stage all volunteer militia, marched into Lilydale and then conducted war games in Coldstream. They broke for lunch apparently. And they were overseen by the Inspector of Overseas Forces, Sir Ian Hamilton, who became, of course, famous at Gallipoli. So he got to know Monash before. And then we're going to quickly roll through the war, but all the events of the war and how it started, we'll be dealing with all of that. Suffice to say that from an Australian perspective, particularly the centre of the world, Melbourne, the young people of Melbourne thought it was an adventure. They were all told they'd be home by Christmas. And they all were thrilled, as the local paper in Melbourne said, thrilled at the announcement of war. Hard to imagine that these days. But that was the case. The first shot of the war fired from Point Nepean, and we commemorated that last year. We'll quickly flick through this. They're the crowds outside Melbourne Town Hall for the first enlistment and the first public meeting at the Town Hall, where the Premier and the Opposition Leader and the Mayor spoke, and there was cheering and shouting and singing and dancing. It was all a joy, and everyone was thrilled. Keep going, Kelly. The first to depart were basically the naval militia from Williamstown, and they left by train from Flinders Street, went up to Sydney and joined the forces who went up to German New Guinea, where the first Australian deaths took place. Now, Monash didn't enlist till September, and at that stage the troops were starting to march through the streets, because every troop that left was marched through the streets. That's Collins Street on the 25th of September 1914. Anybody know what happened on the 25th of September 2014 in Collins Street? There was a parade, which was in the same place, the grand final parade. Going in the same direction, but not quite as big a crowd. So, and it was the same weather, ironically. And that first, well, we'll quickly through this, with nearly 8,000 troops and 3,000 horses left, and they're the ships that left in the first convoy. Monash left in the second convoy. The first convoy left in October. Monash left in December, and they're the typical crowd scenes. That's a ship that most of these ships rotated half a dozen times. There's a ship called the Horrorado, and I just love the boy right on the bow there, waving the hat, which is. And they're typical crowds. They're all meant to stay away, and they'll just break through the lines. And they threw streamers, and the streamers breaking became the symbol of the tears and the family disconnections. That's why we took commemorations down there to rebuild those connections where the first disconnections took place. So there's Monash departing on the Ulysses on 22nd of December 1914, going from the peak of summer off to who knows where. They thought they were going to France. And that's with his wife and daughter. And of course they ended up in Gallipoli, and Monash landed on the 26th of April, occupied spot, and significant.
Was he the commander of all the Australian forces?
No. He had an area of his own, and it didn't go that well for him. And I'm not going to go through it in detail, but he had some problems. But as many have said, he was one of the generals who learned from the problems, and he was also one of the ones who was outspoken and resisted some of the what have since been described as crazy demands of the orders of the British generals. But he got promoted, but he saw a lot of the misery as well, and he describes that misery at length. It's interesting, Monash was a letter writer. Anybody written a letter in the last week? Quick show of hands. Monash died at the age of 60, I think it was. 57, what was it? 66. He left 75,000 letters. It's remarkable.
We might have that many emails.
Yeah, perhaps, but...
he didn't have TV.
Yeah. You can see the big storm November 27th, and Billy Hughes at that stage, most Australians had no idea what had happened at Gallipoli. Billy Hughes probably knew, and it was before the evacuation that he declared we need... Oh, well, there was lots of correspondence going around, Murdoch and co, but he set out the call to arms for more troops, and the volunteers started pouring in before anyone really knew what was going on. So Monash has endured the year at Gallipoli. He had a brief break at Lemnos, I think in September, October, but was there through the big storm and played a prominent role in the evacuation. We'll hear a bit more about that in the next couple of weeks. And of course, in 1916, he was the first to mark the anniversary of ANZAC Day, albeit he did it in Egypt. And he distributed red ribbons to the first landing soldiers and blue ribbons to the others, and that tradition has to some extent been maintained in various areas. Again, he's promoted, and I'll keep going. I'm going to go through this very quickly. 1916. It's curious also that Billy Hughes was Prime Minister. He became Prime Minister after the Prime Minister, Andrew Fisher, pulled the plug under pressure. But Hughes left Australia twice, one stage for nearly 12 months and one stage for 6 months. I know from personal experience, if you're absent for 3 or 4 days, you start to get punished these days. 1917, Monash intimately involved in the Western Front and all the misery there. And of course in 1918, the Battle of Hamel, and then the further promotion. And there's some of his own maps, handwritten by Monash, of the trenches and movements, and the Battle of Amiens, which followed. And the night in which we just saw. And of course Monash's strength was to actually think through the stalemate that the Western Front was, and to work out how to bring the tanks, the Air Force, the troops together in a planned assault. And once he put it in place, they just swept through the German lines, absolutely swept through the lines. Ironically, just last week I was up at Puckapunna looking at their tank museum there, and instead of looking at the museum, they stuck me in all the tanks which we're still training with, some of which are 50 years old. We don't have that many tanks in Australia anymore. We're getting a few more, but it's still not very many. Needless to say, people like me don't fit in those tanks very well. So I put that down along with submariner, pilot and jockey as unlikely occupations. Billy Hughes didn't like Monash much. He saw in Monash a rival, and he made life difficult for Monash, and including at the end of the war he said, okay Monash, you're staying behind to oversee the repatriation of the troops. So Monash stayed in London and successfully repatriated the troops, the last not returning to Melbourne until the 10th of February 1920. And all of those ships that went out, the broken strings, they all came back with those who remained. And initially they actually paraded the returning troops through the streets, but of course there were so many wounded and miserable that it didn't happen for long. And then Monash assumed a new life. And of course he became, amongst other things, chairman of the SEC, and he's responsible for the development of the Latrobe Valley and the distribution of coal-generated electricity in the state. Every time you turn the switch on, you should think about John Monash. And he wrote a book about the Australian victories in France in 1918, which only further aroused the contempt of non-Australian generals and put him offside again. Just for something else to do, he became Vice-Chancellor of Melbourne University, He solved the police strike in 1923 and basically got the call for help from the government, and he used all his contacts in the veterans community, and they put together a volunteer force and solved the police strike. The question of ANZAC Day came up, and they had sort of ANZAC Day commemorations, but they were getting 10,000 to 12,000 people attending. It seemed like a lot at the time. Monash was enlisted to help, and after he was enlisted in 1927, they had an estimated crowd of 600,000 turned up to ANZAC Day in Melbourne. And he, of course, was instrumental in the final sighting of the shrine, and went head to head again with Keith Murdoch, who wanted another location. And Monash stayed out of the fight, and he kept his powder dry, and when he finally got involved, he carried the sway of the community, because every political leader, every newspaper outlet, every media outlet knew Monash could press a button and get 600,000 people on his side. Now, that's the responsibility that he carried. He was approached to become a politician, but Hughes did whatever he could to prevent that from happening. He was also, because the seeds of the Depression were upon us, he was also approached by various groups to participate in a coup and take over the Australian government and to be installed as a dictator himself. And there were some significant right-wing groups with some significant players involved, and Monash rebuffed them, and they kept coming. And it was a subversive exercise. And one of the 75,000 letters he left behind reads as follows. It was addressed to some of those who were seeking to engage him in this subversion and to install him as dictator. And he said in this letter, quote, "What do you and your friends want me to do? To lead a movement to upset the Constitution, oust the jurisdiction of Parliament, and usurp the government's power? If so, I have no ambition to embark on high treason, which any such action would amount to. What would you say if a similar proposal were made by the communists and socialists to seize political power for the benefit of the proletariat and the extinction of bourgeoisie, as they've done in Russia? Would you not call that revolution and treason to the Crown and Constitution? Depend upon it, the only hope for Australia is the ballot box and an educated electorate. You and your people should get busy and form an organisation as efficient, as widespread and as powerful as that of the Labor Party, which was really the only organised political party of those days." And he ended the letter with a pretty sweet quote, "If it be true that many people in Sydney in particular are prepared to trust to my leadership, they should be prepared also to trust my judgment." Now, that correspondence basically killed what was going to be probably the one and only Australian coup, until I was pushed aside. We haven't got to that yet. That's not for the video, that one. Suffice to say, not long after that, Monash died. And what an irony, they might have installed him as a dictator to find that he died 6 months later. And then what? And it's a fantastic reminder of what the substance behind any secular democracy is, and it is the ballot box. And the crowds, enormous crowds, attended his funeral, as was only fitting. Now, I mentioned most of this before, but can there be a sharper mind, a better contributor, a greater Australian than John Monash? I doubt it. The question for us is, how do we let people know? And where can we find connections? And I don't know whether there may be another minister, former Victorian minister in this room, but outside the door of Cabinet in Victoria, there's a bust of John Monash. So if you're a minister and you're walking through the door, you either have to walk straight past and brush against John Monash's bust, or you can walk through the door and pat him on the shoulder on the way through. If the Premier comes through another door, you don't have to endure that, but if you haven't been imbued with the Monash spirit, you shouldn't be there in the first place. it's a fantastic reminder. He's at the door. And whilst he was chairman of the SEC, there was a famous occasion when he was seeking some additional funding to do some work. And the Premier of the day said, go away. So Monash just turned up at the cabinet and demanded to be admitted. And again, the power of the 600,000 he could raise in a flash, they let him in, and he basically put it to them, you do it my way or I don't do it at all. And he walked out with approval for what he wanted. And it's a special message, get on with it. And to have the bust of Monash, for me, is a message, get on with it. Do with what you have to do in Victoria's interest, nothing else. Now, he died in 1931, huge service. Anybody ever been to his grave? A couple. Ruth?
Where is he?
It's in Caulfield Cemetery.
Right.
Brighton Cemetery. Brighton Cemetery. It's not easy to find, but it is marked. And there's the guy there. It is a very humble grave, and that's what he wanted. It's in a little Jewish sector, and that's all there is. And there are graves crowded around it. There's no fence around it, and it's as he wanted. Curiously, if you're really paying attention when we put up his record of military history, the summary record, it said that his address was 36 Collins Street. And it comes as a shock to you that a lot of the boys who enlisted told fibs about their age, their addresses, their names, the spelling of the names. And a lot of told fibs about their religion. A lot of Jews said they were Church of England. Ironically, a lot of Church of England boys declared they were Jews later in the war in order to get the Saturdays off during the campaign, which is absolutely true. But we had a call from somebody last year who had been storing this on a board in a warehouse or workshop down Dandenong Way for nearly 10 years. And it was a weather-beaten thing he'd found when he was wrecking some works down in South Melbourne. It had been salvaged from the demolition of 360 Collins Street, which was the Collins House School, which my ancestors had some connection. And lo and behold, there's John Monash on it. And it wasn't 36 Collins Street, it was 360 Collins Street.
We know what 36 Collins Street is.
Yes. But there's his name, and you can't see that properly. So there's my grandfather's name. And he didn't come back. He survived Gallipoli, but was killed in Ypres later. So out there's all this stuff that organisations have, people have, buried in drawers, medals, diaries, mementos, stuff all over the world. And the baby boomers are now starting to shuffle through it and say, well, do you want this? Do you want this? And we're going to have a problem in the next 10 years. So who went with Monash? That little website I referred to, the AIF project, and you click one button, open up Monash's name in the middle of his record, you press on one button and give you the names of those he served with in his unit, including their addresses. And you can see in red the two of those he served with in the, this is basically the headquarters group. Two of them didn't come back. But you can also see their addresses. And some of those addresses still exist. Can we use that next? So you can do this in an instant, just go to Google Earth. And suddenly there's the home, once occupied, still exists, once occupied by one of the men and women on occasion who served for John Monash. I don't know who lives there. There's an opportunity screaming out there for the kids in that neighbourhood to attach themselves to that. So, Monash lived in lots of different places. He lived for a while in Jerilderie, where he purportedly met Ned Kelly. His father sold Ned Kelly a horse. And Monash regarded that as one of his seminal moments in his life. Who knows why, but certainly he thought so. But he lived in lots of different places. And anybody know any of these homes? Anybody been to a Monash home? That's where he's born, in Rich Hill Terrace in 58 Dudley Street in West Melbourne, just on the north side of Flagstaff Gardens. You wouldn't know. But we could do so much more. We're not talking about burdening anybody who owns those properties now, just plaques and information and kids. And instead of having big commemorations down at the Shrine and doing the stuff we always do, because that's what we do, actually do it locally, where kids can be involved. This is Germania Cottage in Clifton Street, Richmond. It's still there. It's still called Germania Cottage. Clifton Street, Richmond. It's only a little street. There's about 30 boys enlisted from Clifton Street, Richmond. This is Yarra Street, Hawthorn. The home is now buried behind this. It's still there. And just up the road, that's not the home he lived in, but that's where he lived, just up the road, Isabella Grove. And in St George's Road, now gone, Iona, and there's now a bunch of units, and this is Monash Drive. And that's the only vestige of information. But I don't
It's a good auction there.
Good auction.
Like this stuff.
Yeah. So, how do you make connections? So we had a quick look at what we knew of the guest list tonight, and we picked on a couple of names. So we've got a Banfield here, so yeah. I don't know whether any of these are brothers, but One Click produces 29 Banfields, including Charles Arthur Banfield, and we just looked up Buckingham Street, Richmond, and there were 34 boys who were enlisted from Buckingham Street, Richmond. When you go through this exercise, you can look in detail when they enlisted. You can see neighbours who enlisted, you can see the sequence they enlisted in, and you can see what happened to them. You can understand what the sentiment of the street was over 4 years. And there's a street in, where is it, Ascot Baillieu Street in Kensington. And there's about 30, 40 boys who are listed there. It's a one-sided street because it faces the railway line. Virtually every second home in Baillieu Street had the original ANZAC. And that's an invitation for the young people of Baillieu Street to come together. Oh, ANZAC Day, but come together on a day that means something to one of those boys and to make connections at that level. So then, who else do we have a look at? Gubbins, we've got some Gubbins. Yeah. 29 Gubbins. We had a quick look at Bay Street. I don't know whether any of these are relatives, and perhaps you don't know. When we do a full-blown exercise on this, and invariably we find people who didn't know that they had a relative who served, and invariably we find people having a bit of a tear up because we go into some detailed records, and we've had people tearing up because that's their father's signature that pops up on the screen and stuff like that. But just in Bay Street, Port Melbourne, 105 original ANZACs. Renoufs, we've got some Renoufs. Yeah, there you go. 13 Renoufs, and these are all the Australian original ANZACs. If you can narrow it down to Victorians, which makes it even more exclusive. The Thorburns, 26 Thorburns. We've got a Thorburn, there you go. These are just very quick examples. Tonks, we've got some Tonks here. Some Tonks on the list. Downshire Road, Elstonwick, 28 in Downshire Road, Elstonwick. And all of that's available. Click, click, click. It's that quick under that AIF project information. You can put a street name in, you can put an address in, you can put a surname in. And every time you do it, you're making a connection, which is something personal. At the end of the day, these represent the stories. And there are lots of stories about John Monash. And at times, like the centennial, lots of more stories. Roland Perry's got the books out, Peter Simon's rolling the books out. There's an industry of storytellers. On ANZAC Day, on November the 11th, the stories get told. The media tells stories, there's always some new ones to tell. We have the service, we have the commemoration, and the kids stand at attention, we sing the anthem, and we feel a little bit lumpy in the throat. What happens the day after? And if you go around and test kids, most of them can't remember a thing that happened. And they know that they're meant to be respectful, and they are. If it's an honour board, or if it's a commemorative service, or it's a sculpture, they've seen it all before, they'll sing the anthem, they'll be respectful, and they'll hear the stories, they'll listen to the stories. And that's all they are, they're stories. There's a huge distinction in commemoration between storytelling and connecting people to those stories. And we have tried in Victoria to let others worry about the stories we're going to try and worry about the connections. And hence that bit of paper you have in front of you is not for you to go home and find all this information and package up the stories and hand them to your kids and grandkids. Because what happens to stories is they end up on the shelves. And they largely remain untouched. And with commemorations, not just 100 years' time, but as Churchill said, 100, 200, 300 years' time, you have to have connections. And the only way to connect to those stories, to avoid it just being a very well stocked of unread books, is to allow young people to find the connections themselves. And hence those websites, the AIF project, you can simply say to a kid, I don't understand this, but apparently you can put a name in here and find, can you go and do it for me? Now, if your name's Smith, you've got a problem. There's about 5,000 Smiths who are original ANZACs. But you watch kids' faces, and we've done this at schools, when they offer a name up, and it pops up on the screen, oh, wow, suddenly they're interested. And if you show them an address they live in, wow, they're suddenly interested. Or the street they live in, they're interested. Or the church, or the school or the sporting club, they're interested. The interest becomes a lifelong connection. But if you simply give it all to them, package it up as baby boomers tend to do, nice and neat and tidy, here's one for each of the kids. Thanks, Gran, on the shelf, and forgotten the next day. So the purpose of this is to talk about Monash, but most of you are very well educated anyway, and to simply say to you that there is more we can do to connect. I just want to close on one thing. We talked about Monash having a hard time. Monash never became a field marshal or whatever the king officials wanted him to become. He was arguably discriminated against as a general, and even after he returned. After he returned for political reasons, the likes of Billy Hughes, didn't want him around because he was a competition. In the battlefield, he was discriminated against as a general because he was colonial, God forbid, colonial. Secondly, he had German parents. Thirdly, he was Jewish. God forbid, Jewish, colonial, German parents.
And militia.
But not only that, he wasn't a professional soldier. He was a volunteer. So you add the political reasons, and he was very much discriminated against, and it continued. Now, I had the honour last year of launching this book, three-part book called The Comprehensive History, the Cambridge History of the First World War, 3 volumes, 100 authors, all distinguished historians, and edited by Professor J. Winter. And I had the honour of launching that in last year, a comprehensive history of the First World War. You will not find John Monash's name in there, in the history. However, it is mentioned once because Professor J. Winter was a visiting professor at Monash University. And sadly, this is still going on. And you can look at some of the British history, and Monash doesn't get a great mention if he gets mentioned at all. Even in our ANZAC Centre, recently launched in Albany. It's a long way to Perth, and it's a long way to Albany, it's a long way up the hill to get into the ANZAC Centre, some $50–60 million, and you've got to pay $27 to get into the door. And then you'll find a very small panel about Monash tucked away in the corner. Now, I can't vouch for why that is, but it goes on. And there are some missing things with John Monash, and his place in history, I think, is affirmed, but to actually allow kids to find him is going to be a challenge. There's never been a feature film made about John Monash. There are 3 in the making at the moment, under consideration. I've read the script for one, which is a very, very powerful script that puts John Monash into a context of some several thousand years and addresses these issues. it is inarguable that he changed the course of the war in the Western Front. It's inarguable that he changed the course of Victoria. And it's inarguable that he changed the course of Australia by standing with the ballot box and education. And he's certainly Australia's greatest general. So we're just going to close by showing you a trailer for a documentary which another Melbourne boy who now lives in Los Angeles is putting together called Whitewash. And hopefully we get volume with it as well. Just finish with one quote from Roland Perry's book. Former Corps Commander had no hope of being offered the position of Commander-in-Chief or any position in the regular armed services. He wasn't honoured with any payment either. The British government gave General Haig £100,000 on an earldom. Rawlinson received £30,000 on a barony. Birdwood £10,000 on a baronetcy. Canada, Curry, who was equally as capable as Monash, grumbled a lot and received some recognition. Monash was allowed to keep his sword, and that was it. Thanks very much.